Now that we've gone through the structure and anatomy of the GI tract, as well as discussed some of the accessory organs and what they contribute, let's put this all together and talk about digestion. There is mechanical digestion, which is the physical breakdown of food, such as what occurs during chewing. We're going to focus primarily on chemical digestion, which involves substances that help break nutrients into forms that can ultimately be absorbed. We're going to be focusing on the digestion of carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Let's first look at carbohydrates. The digestion of carbohydrates begins in the mouth. Our salivary glands secrete salivary amylase. This enzyme begins the digestion of carbohydrates, particularly starch, breaking them into smaller carbohydrate molecules. In the stomach, salivary amylase becomes inactivated by the acidic environment, and no additional enzymes are added to the stomach that contribute significantly to carbohydrate digestion. Once we reach the small intestine, another amylase is added, this time from the pancreas. It's called pancreatic amylase. It continues carbohydrate digestion, producing smaller carbohydrates, breaking them down to disaccharides and oligosaccharides. Now, as we consider the lining of the small intestine, remember that the individual cells had microvilli on their apical surface, collectively forming the brush border. Embedded within the brush border are enzymes. These are called brush border enzymes. These enzymes complete carbohydrate digestion by breaking the remaining small carbohydrates, including disaccharides, into monosaccharides. Once these carbohydrates are broken down into monosaccharides, they can cross the apical membrane of the enterocyte and subsequently cross the basolateral membrane to enter the circulation. Looking at proteins, there's essentially no significant chemical digestion of proteins that occurs in the oral cavity. When we reach the stomach, we see contributions from a couple of different cell types, specifically chief cells and parietal cells located within the gastric glands. Chief cells secrete pepsinogen, while parietal cells secrete hydrochloric acid. Pepsinogen is inactive, but in the acidic environment produced by the secretion of the parietal cells, hydrochloric acid converts pepsinogen to its active enzyme, pepsin. Pepsin can then activate additional pepsinogen, creating more pepsin. Pepsin also acts on dietary proteins, breaking them into smaller peptide fragments. These peptide fragments then pass into the small intestine. In the small intestine, we see important contributions from the pancreas. The pancreas releases a series of zymogens. Zymogens are inactive enzyme precursors. One important zymogen is trypsinogen. On the brush border of the small intestine, we have an enzyme called enteropeptidase, previously known as enterokinase. Enteropeptidase activates trypsinogen to its active form of trypsin. Trypsin is important because it can activate several other pancreatic zymogens into active proteases. These proteases continue breaking peptide fragments into smaller peptides and amino acids. Amino acids, dipeptides, and tripeptides can then be absorbed across the intestinal. Lipids also begin to undergo digestion within the oral cavity. At the back portion of the tongue are glands that release lingual lipase. As food continues to the stomach, chief cells within the stomach release gastric lipase. These enzymes work on the surface of the lipid molecule and begin the process of digestion of dietary lipids. Both lingual and gastric lipase act on the surface of these fat droplets, so the amount of triglyceride available to these enzymes is limited by surface area. When we move into the small intestine, we get additional help from the liver and the pancreas. The pancreas releases pancreatic lipase. This also acts on the surface of the fat droplets and produces primarily monoglycerides and free fatty acids. The efficiency of this process depends heavily on available surface area. This is where bile acids produced by the liver become important. Because bile acids are amphipathic, they help emulsify large fat droplets into much smaller droplets and help keep these dispersed. This process is called emulsification. Emulsification greatly increases the surface area available for pancreatic lipase and therefore enhances the chemical digestion of triglycerides into monoglycerides and free fatty acids. This is all occurring within the small intestine. Because the free fatty acids and monoglycerides are lipophilic, we might initially expect them to move readily toward and across the enterocyte membrane. However, the overlying intestinal epithelium is covered by an unstirred water layer. This creates a barrier that these poorly water-soluble substances cannot cross. In the small intestine, the free fatty acids and monoglycerides, in addition to bile salts and some cholesterol and phospholipids, aggregate into particles called micelles. These micelles allow the lipid digestion products to move through the unstirred water layer and reach the surface of the intestinal epithelium. Here we have an individual enterocyte with its microvilli and the overlying unstirred water layer. With the products of digestion organized into these micelles, they now can approach the brush border and deliver the lipid digestion products to the apical membrane. The monoglycerides and free fatty acids can then enter the enterocyte through various uptake mechanisms, which we'll discuss in greater detail in our lipid lecture. Once inside the enterocyte, the free fatty acids and monoglycerides are processed by the smooth endoplasmic reticulum and reassembled back into triglycerides. These triglycerides, along with some cholesterol, phospholipids, and proteins, are then packaged into particles in the Golgi apparatus called chylomicrons. Chylomicrons are too large to enter most intestinal blood capillaries directly. Instead, they leave the enterocyte by exocytosis and enter the intestinal lymphatic vessels called lacteals. They are then transported through the lymphatic system and eventually enter the venous circulation through the thoracic duct.